Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something kind of surprising in the world of health.
Hmm.
A dip. A dip in U.S. adult obesity rates.
Interesting.
Yeah, after a decade of these numbers just kind of going up, up, up,
Right.
now they're going down.
Wow.
And we're going to try to figure out why.
Yeah,
What's going on here?
definitely.
So we've got a few things to dig into today. We've got this study from JAMA Health Forum, which is super interesting.
Okay.
Also a pretty lively Reddit discussion. People always have a lot to say about this.
Of course.
And then an NBC News piece with some expert commentary.
Great.
So yeah, lots to unpack.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so is this just a blip? Like a one-time thing? Or is this like the beginning of a real trend?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah, so we want to find out.
Definitely.
So let's start with the basics. What did this JAMA study actually find?
Okay, so they looked at a ton of data, like 16.7 million adults.
Yeah.
And they saw that obesity in U.S. adults went down
Okay.
from 46% in 2022 to 45.6% in 2023.
Okay, so 16.7 million adults, that's a lot of data points.
Oh, yeah, huge study.
But still, it's like a pretty small change,
Yeah.
right? From 46 to 45.6.
Yeah, it is a small change.
And I was reading the NBC article, and they pointed out that those rates from the study are actually higher than what the CDC usually reports.
Mm-hmm.
So the CDC says it's closer to 40% of U.S. adults having obesity between 2021 and 2023.
It's interesting how the way you define and measure obesity can really change the numbers.
That's true.
But the point is, it seems like no matter how you slice it,
Right.
the trend is going down.
Okay, so that's really interesting.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
now the question is why? Why is this happening?
Right.
And the JMS study, they broke things down by region and demographics, and some interesting things pop up there.
Oh, like what?
So the biggest decrease they saw was in the South.
The South, huh?
Yeah, especially for women and older adults, 66 to 75.
Interesting.
But then, flip side, obesity rates actually went up for Asian Americans.
Huh.
So it's what's going on regionally? What do you think?
Well, it's tough to say for sure. Obesity is complicated. There's so many factors.
Right.
But one thing that jumps out at me from the study is that the South also had, get this, the highest rate of GLP-1 drug dispensing.
Oh, yeah. Like Ozempic.
Exactly. Those medications that are everywhere right now.
Right. Everyone's talking about those. And I was just reading about them on that Reddit thread. And a lot of people are saying that those drugs might be a big reason why these numbers are going down.
Yeah, I can see why people would think that, especially with the South having those high dispensing rates.
Right.
But, you got to be careful. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Sure.
This study, it only tracked how many prescriptions were filled.
Oh.
Not whether people were actually taking the medication. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it only looked at those GLP-1 drugs, not like all the other weight loss medications out there.
Okay, so maybe it's not the whole story.
Right. Exactly.
And then I saw that on Reddit, too. Some people were kind of skeptical about that being the main explanation. Some people were saying maybe COVID deaths, especially among people, struggling with obesity.
Right.
Maybe those deaths are skewing the numbers.
That's possible.
Yeah, and others were bringing up, the cost of food going up.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe people are just eating less in general, especially processed foods, fast food, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
So what do you think about those ideas? The COVID deaths and the food costs. Could those be playing a role?
I think they could be, definitely. I mean, especially with COVID, those deaths were, really concentrated in certain areas like the South.
Right, yeah.
So it makes sense that they would have some impact on the overall numbers.
Okay.
But is it enough to explain the whole decline? Probably not.
Okay, so maybe a piece of the puzzle.
Right, a piece of the puzzle.
And what about the food costs thing? Could that really be a factor?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
If people are having to cut back on food spending because prices are so high, it could change what they're eating, And unfortunately, healthy foods, they tend to be more expensive.
That's true.
So it's this balancing act for people.
Yeah, trying to make ends meet.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that at the grocery store myself.
Yeah.
It's getting harder to eat healthy on a budget.
It really is.
But I also saw some pushback on that idea on Reddit, people saying well, the cheaper foods are often the more processed ones,
Ow.
the calorie-dense ones, so maybe that would actually lead to more weight gain.
That's true, too. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's not a simple answer.
Not at all. It's all these different factors kind of interacting with each other.
Right. Yeah.
It's a whole system.
Okay, so we've got these potential factors. the weight loss drugs, COVID's impact, economic shifts.
Right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to consider.
Yeah, it's pretty complex.
Definitely.
But what about the long term? Like, will this dip continue, or is it just like a blip, temporary thing?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, the NBC article I read, they talked to some experts, and some were cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
But others were like, whoa, hold on. It's too early to say this is a trend.
Right.
We've seen obesity rates go down before,
Yeah.
only to have them bounce right back up later.
So no easy answers there, but I'm curious, like, if we want this trend to keep going, to continue,
Right.
what do the experts say needs to happen?
Well, they pretty much all agree. Tackling obesity, it's got to be like a multi-pronged approach. You can't just rely on weight loss drugs like they're a magic bullet.
Right. It's about more than just bailing out the water in that leaky boat. We got to
Right.
patch up those holes, too.
Exactly. We need to be thinking about, preventing it in the first place,
Okay.
promoting healthier lifestyles, and making those healthy food options, easier to get and less expensive.
Right.
It's a big problem, needs a big solution.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of solutions, I noticed on that Reddit thread, there were some really strong opinions about these weight loss drugs.
Yeah.
Some people acting like they're a miracle cure.
Hmm.
Others really worried about side effects.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
what if people become dependent on medication?
It's understandable, it's like anytime there's some new medical breakthrough,
Yeah.
people get all excited, but then you got to balance that with realistic expectations.
Right.
These drugs, they can be really helpful for some people,
Yeah.
but they're not magic. And like any drug, there are potential side effects.
The NBC article talked about that, too.
Yeah.
We just don't have enough long-term data yet to really know the full impact of these drugs.
Exactly. We need more research.
Yeah.
And even if they turn out to be super effective, we still can't ignore those behavioral and environmental things,
Right.
the things that are really driving obesity in the first place.
Okay, so it sounds like lifestyle changes are still super important.
Absolutely. Diet, exercise, stress management,
Yeah.
those are all key parts of a sustainable approach to managing your weight.
Right. It's not just about popping a pill. It's about building those healthy habits.
Exactly. It's a lifestyle.
So going back to your leaky boat analogy for a sec,
Mhm.
it's not enough to just patch the holes. You also got to learn how to, navigate those rough waters, right?
That's exactly. It's about giving people the tools and the knowledge they need
Okay.
to make healthy choices and to stay healthy, long term.
All right. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about those potential reasons for this dip in obesity rates.
Right.
We talked about the long-term outlook
Yeah.
and the need to really take a multifaceted approach.
Definitely.
But just to bring it all back to our listeners, what's the key takeaway from this whole deep dive?
I think the main thing is this dip, it's encouraging, right?
Yeah.
But it's just one piece of a very big puzzle.
Okay.
There's not one single reason why this is happening, and it's too soon to be celebrating a victory.
So we're not out of the woods yet.
Not quite, but it does give us some hope.
Okay.
It shows that progress is possible.
Right.
That the work we're doing to fight obesity, it can actually make a difference.
And it sounds like that's going to involve individuals making choices, but also medical advances and changes in our society as a whole.
Exactly. We all got to work together.
Yeah, it's a team effort. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It's been great.
We've gone from the hard data to the social dynamics and even some philosophical stuff.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, definitely. But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to leave our listener with one last question to ponder. If we look beyond just the numbers, what does this dip in obesity rates tell us about our relationship with food, with our bodies, with health as a whole society? What does it mean for the future of public health?
That's a really big question.
Yeah, and as we were talking about all these different things, the weight loss drugs and the economy and even just the after effects of the pandemic,
Right.
it really makes you think about how interconnected everything is.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about what one person chooses to do.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it's the whole system, all these structures that kind of shape those choices.
Exactly. We always talk about obesity like it's a personal responsibility thing.
Right.
But it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
Do people have access to healthy foods? Are there safe places to exercise?
Yeah.
What kinds of messages are they getting from food advertising? All
Right.
those things matter.
Yeah, and those are societal issues,
Exactly. It's not just about the individual.
No, not at all. And that leaky boat analogy you talked about
Yeah.
really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those bigger issues that we have to fix as a society.
Right. If we want real change. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to like our relationship with food, you know,
Right.
with our bodies.
Uh-huh.
Like, are we moving away from those quick fixes,
I hope so.
the fad diets and all that?
Yeah.
Are we starting to think about health in a more holistic way?
Well, I think more and more people are starting to realize that health isn't just about, the number on the scale. It's
Yeah.
it's mental, it's emotional, it's physical.
Biologically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not like a destination, it's a journey,
It's a
right?
process, yeah. And I see that shift happening too.
Eat.
Like people are starting to focus on building those healthy habits,
Uh-huh.
celebrating different body types.
Right. And I think, even though this dip in obesity rates is small, it could be a sign that we're headed in the right direction as a society.
That's a good thought.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
You too. It's been great.
It's been super interesting to kind of dive into this with you. Look at all these different angles.
Yeah.
We went from the data to the social stuff. We even got a little philosophical there.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's important to have these conversations to
Yeah.
really understand these big public health issues like obesity.
For sure. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought.
Hopefully.
Pun intended, of course. But we've looked at the reasons behind this dip in obesity rates,
Uh-huh.
talked about how complex this issue really is
Yeah,
and how we need to tackle it from all sides.
definitely.
But ultimately, it's up to each of us to figure out what this all means.
Right.
What choices are we going to make for our own health?
Right.
And how can we make our communities healthier?
Good question.
Yeah, lots to think about. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.